On this episode of Mighty Car Mods, I'm going to get this little K-Truck driving and hitting boost. Welcome to another episode of Mighty Car Mods. Recently, we turbocharged this mad little K-Truck. This is a 2016 Daihatsu Hi-Jet. It's actually still a current model in Japan. You can go into a dealership and get something that looks pretty much like this. It's got a 3-cylinder KFVE engine, which is tucked down right under the cab. We turbocharged it using a turbo off an old Subaru Liberty. It's a ball bearing turbo. It's pretty well sized for this particular application. Really happy with how it turned out. It makes mad noises, nothing leaks, it all works really well. But there's no engine management to actually do anything with that boost that we're generating.
And the solution to this problem is an aftermarket engine management system. I'm going to be using a Haltech Elite 1500, which will control the electronic throttle, fuel pump, injectors, ignition, and all associated sensors. First step is to bin the factory ECU and strip back the wires so I can see what I'm dealing with.
Okay, so what we're dealing with here is the two plugs that have all the wiring that go to the factory ECU. The trick is knowing what all these pins do. By stripping back the insulation there, we can see all the wire colors. Some stuff's really obvious, like you can see a twisted pair there. That's either going to be CAN or it could potentially be like a sensor that was a little bit more prone to interference. There's also wires that double into other wires, and that's often grounding systems. But I still didn't know what everything does. So, how do you get around that problem? Well, you need a pin out. And I managed to get one. It was very difficult to get one. Everywhere I looked, I just basically came up against dead ends. So we contacted a couple of guys in Japan that do modify these trucks. There's a handful of them. There's a bit of a scene actually for this, but turboing them and doing custom ECUs is not as much of a thing as putting wheels and flares and slamming them and doing all sorts of crazy stuff is. So I spoke to Rob and I said, man, anything you can turn up, please have a look on the Japanese internet and let me know what you find. And he couldn't find much, but then he did something awesome. Rob went down to a Daihatsu dealership in Japan and just walked up to the service guys and said, hey guys, I need an ECU pin out for my Hi-Jet. And he came out with about 9 or 10 pages of documents. They just handed them over. Everything in there is in kanji or Japanese, and yeah, not that useful. But then, without telling me he was going to do this, he went through and translated every single one. So every single bit of information on there, you can see in red there, has the translation of what it is.
With this key to the K-Truck ECU, I can finally get this engine running properly. I am absolutely biting off more than I can chew right now, but with a job like this, you just have to pick a starting point and get stuck into it. There isn't much spare space in the truck cabin, but I've found a spot to run the wiring loom. It requires a 2-inch hole to fit the supplied grommet that will help seal water and dirt out. I'm drilling into the floor from underneath and then running the wiring loom through. I'm also leaving it unwrapped so I can connect everything, test it all, and then seal it up right at the end after I've checked everything works. It begins. I'm now splicing in, so I've found the ground, I've connected that, and now I'm doing injectors, so grey, blue, and red is injector 1, 2, and 3. Fairly obvious on the plug actually, so you count from this side, go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, empty, 6, 7, 8, there they are. So injector 1, 2, and 3, I cut that in, I bypass the factory ECU, so I'm not splicing into this wire, in which case I would strip it back like I did with the ground. I'm actually separating it completely, so the Haltech will more or less send the signal, or earth, whatever it is, this wire to fire an injector. A few things here that I'm going to share and a few things here that I'm going to intercept. Ones that I'm sharing is like cam and crank. So that's the shielded wires, that one's for the cam, that one's for the crank, and I found those two wires as well. Interestingly, the general translation for that color is grass. And the rest seems to make sense, like purple, pink, blue, whatever. But yeah, I thought grass was kind of funny. It's like the literal translation. The ones that I've cut off and intercepted, that's coils and injectors. And the only thing left to do now to actually fire the Haltech up and check the triggering is the power for the ECU. But that one's proving to be a little bit tricky because of how it works on this diagram. We don't know for sure that the Haltech supports this trigger type. It probably does because it supports other Daihatsu and Toyota engines, and there's no real reason Daihatsu would change it just cause. But you never know. Been wrong before. So I'll plug a laptop in, get all that stuff organised, and do some Wi-Fi action and do some triggering. And if we've got triggering, this thing will run because I've done pretty much everything else: coils, fuel pump, injectors, all the basics just to make it work. And then there's more technical stuff to do with power steering, speed inputs, full drive, low range, alternator control, air conditioning. Maybe I said that twice. All that stuff as well. But get to that later.
So where I'm up to now is it's time to start cranking this thing over and making sure that the Haltech is receiving all the information it needs to then eventually run this engine. The most important thing is triggering, and that's where you've got a sensor on the crank and a sensor on the cam, and it's a relationship of those two things over the full 720-degree cycle of the engine that you need to know. So we basically need to put a timing light on the crank, work out where top dead center is, make sure it's on the right part of the cycle, and then tell the Haltech the offset of where top dead center is in relation to that sensor. As soon as the Haltech knows that information and we tell it injector size, we give it air temperature and a few other small details, this will run. As long as the triggering works, it will run. So what we're going to do now is go through it. I'll probably get Dave on the phone as well at some point just to sort of hold my hand a bit through some of this to save a bit of time so we can film it and show you guys how we're going to do it. But yeah, feeling good. These wires we don't need. Everything else is hooked up for the most basic stuff. And now we're going to try and trigger it and see if we can get this thing to start.
Popular cars with common engines can often skip all these steps and just plug in an aftermarket ECU and turn the key. But I have a few more steps to complete with some remote tech support from Dave.
Right, here we go, cranking, timing light. Yeah, dude, that is bang on. I mean, I don't know exactly what that mark means, but I know you've completely nailed the mark.
It's bang on one of those two marks, which is within 20 degrees of the
Great.
actual number that we need, so you
Great.
will be able to run.
So we're
So
at our
it's either
TDC.
going to be
Yep.
it's either going to be this TDC number or a TDC angle number 360 degrees away from this.
Yep.
So that we're firing on top dead center.
Oh, it sounds like it wants to go. And the triggering is good.
It's getting closer.
Here we go. Whoa! It's close. Oh, dude, it's so close.
Some throttle as well.
I'm not, because I have to put my foot on the clutch and I don't have enough feet. Hang on, I can use my hand. Here we go, I'll use my hand.
Foot hanging around an MCM. Come on.
I'll give it some throttle, here we go. Starting. Oh. Yeah, dude, it's running. It is running.
It sounds weird, but
Oh, that's, yeah, it's right. It sounds a bit weird because it's there's just pipes knocking that I need to fix. But if I hold a bit of throttle, that is going.
okay, that's fantastic.
Super doughy, but it is working. Thank you very much. I'll come back to you shortly.
Very good.
Bye.
No worries. Good on you.
It might sound really bad. That's for a few reasons. One is that the pipe that goes from the turbo to the intercooler across the top, it's just knocking because I need to put a little bend in it. I was limited by the silicon hose that I could get at the time, so I know I need to fix that. So it's just the engine moving around on the mounts quite a bit. The fact that idles at all is awesome. That means it's going to work. That means that the triggering is right. It means that we're close on the injector size. But really, now that we know that, it's a good time to now start putting other things in that actually make it easier for someone who's tuning your car. So that is wideband oxygen sensor, because in real time, Dave or Scott or even me, if I end up tuning this, which I may, can see exactly what is coming out of that exhaust pipe. I can smell that the car is kind of rich, but if you have a wideband in there, you can see it. The other thing is I've got in aftermarket upgraded injectors, which I was always going to put in. I have to put them in because otherwise this will run out of fuel. They say exactly what size they are. We don't know what size the factory ones are without pulling them out and measuring them. So if I install that, which is a really quick job, and install the wideband, there's a bung in the exhaust, so you can just screw it straight in, attach it up to the Haltech, and then we have more information and more data to make sure this is more accurate, so I don't waste too much time. So let's do it.
Our turbo is increasing the amount of air going into the cylinders, and to make use of it and turn it into skids, we need to add more fuel than the factory injectors can deliver. The manufacturer chooses injector size based on their desired power output, as well as lots of other factors like emissions, smooth running, and let's not forget cost. Luckily, the injectors themselves are often all very similar shapes and sizes, so upgrades aren't too difficult. This truck uses a simple port injection setup with a returnless fuel system. I've got myself some injectors from Raceworks who also make the adapters to make them fit the fuel rail and the head. It's a pretty straightforward job of lubing everything up and then swapping them over and installing them back into the engine.
So the aftermarket injectors are a tiny, weeny bit longer. So what you need to do is space out the rail. It's actually fine. Them being bigger is fine. I've got room here, but you need something to actually bolt it down. So I'm using these highly scientific, giant galvanized nuts because I don't have anything else at the moment I can use, but that should be enough just to get the thing running. And I'll get some nicely CNC'd machined ones in there, or I won't, and I'll just leave Bunnings nuts in there. All right, new upgraded injectors are installed. Now I'm going to turn the key and prime the fuel pump and hope that there's no leaks.
When you turn the key, the ECU primes the fuel system by powering up the pump so there's pressure at the injectors ready to squirt in so it can bang. You tell the Haltech what size the injectors are so it can calculate how long to open them for.
The next piece of our puzzle is our wideband oxygen sensor. This tells the ECU what the fuel and air mixture is, the fuel to air ratios that's coming out of the exhaust pipe. An invaluable tool for tuning, particularly if you're tuning it yourself, particularly if you're tuning it over Wi-Fi, which is probably what we're going to end up doing. So all we have to do is put that in the exhaust pipe where we had the bung on the cat converter, and then run this through. And there's a box that sits, I would say engine bay, except the entire truck is basically like an engine bay. So we can pretty much pick our spot, and then we just connect up this via the Haltech's CAN network to the ECU using a plug. Looks like that. Connect it up, and then we're good to go. So I hit a little speed bump. I forgot that the Daihatsu has different connectors on the injectors than what the Bosch ones I just put in are that I got from Raceworks. There's actually adapters for them, and I think I do have some of those. So I'm going to throw the adapters on, but this should be ready to start and ready to actually like properly fine tune the idle and get all that sort of stuff working. In the meantime, I'm also going to weld on a new air temperature sensor and I'm going to fix that pipe. So a bit of work to do. I'll take you along for the journey. See you in a bit.
As you've probably worked out by now, everything takes longer when you go custom, no matter if it's the world's most basic tip truck or a show-stopping build. The rewards are worth it if you end up with something unique and something you've journeyed through yourself. I'm also fixing mistakes I made when we first turboed the thing and making plenty more along the way, but it is how we learn and improve.
So while idling it, I've just discovered something else, and that is if that I pull out the coil on the third cylinder, no change, which means we are not getting spark on that cylinder. So back on the laptop, just got to check the flow settings for the injectors, which are 346. I feel like I'm getting close now. I worked out that if I pulled off the wiring for the ignition coils, it wouldn't idle properly, but I double checked the wiring back here, buzzed it out, and it's correct. So the only thing that could be wrong is potentially the firing order's wrong in the software. We just guessed at that and assumed it's like lots of other 4-cylinder cars. I've now changed it, instead of being 132 to 123, which means it just goes cylinder 1, cylinder 2, and cylinder 3 over and over and over again. I've changed that in the software. So now, moment of truth, this should stop sounding like a rotary and start sounding like a mad little 3-cylinder Daihatsu. So fingers crossed, here we go. Fuel pump is on. Clutch is in. Come on, K-Truck. Yes! Yeah! Amazing. That's awesome. That means it's going to work.
I now know that my triggering, firing order, injectors and wiring are all correct. I now need to supply those bigger injectors with more fuel flow, as the factory pump is tiny and spec'd only to work with the tiny injectors that came out. Of course, there's no drop-in aftermarket method for this, so once again I'm going to have to customise something to fit. I found the next smallest pump I can, which is a common upgrade for 2-litre turbo engines. Mine is less than half the size and will make less than half the power, but with a good regulator it should work just fine. It doesn't drop straight in, so I'm going to have to hack up my plastic fuel hanger to make it fit, as well as completely redesign the fuel system. This is the kind of fuel hanger you see on modern EFI cars. Now 20, 30 years ago, these would be made out of metal, and so you could just sort of cut them and weld them and modify them and hack them up. It doesn't mean you can't hack these up, it's just a little bit different. What I'm doing is making sure that I've got the bottom level of this new fuel pump at the same height so I don't get weird issues of running out of fuel. And then all I'm doing is cutting out the top of this so that the longer fuel pump and higher flowing fuel pump will hang out the top. All I've then got to do is get power to it, which is easy, just match the colours on the wires. The harder bit is actually getting the fuel flow out from the top of the actual pump itself and out to the car. Now I do have a little fitting here that I can use. You can also get fittings that you drill through to make work. Not as easy in this particular setup. So now I've just got to do a little bit more plastic hacking and I can drop this straight back into the tank. So I've chosen to mount the fuel pressure reg here on the back rail. It doesn't hit because the tipper has this sort of frame and it would sit up in here. The fuel pump supplies high pressure fuel up through here. This is the recycled LS part. It plugs into there, tighten all these fittings up. That's the vacuum and boost source if we want to do rising rate adjustment. That's the sensor that goes to the Haltech for fuel pressure. And this is the outlet. And then the outlet goes from here down into there, which sends it up to the engine. I also have a flex sensor, and I'm gonna put one in because I'm here and it's easy, and it's again just something that plugs in with one of these little connectors. And the reason I'm going to use one of those is the motor is high compression, so I might actually need ethanol just to make this thing work. Down the track, decompress, get a JDM turbo engine. There's other options, but this at least means that I won't get stuck and I can run a mixture. Also, you can put jerry cans in the back of this tray pretty easily, so even if we do go on another adventure, I don't really have to worry about running out of ethanol. Plus, it's kind of cool to run a K-Truck on ethanol. Anyway, I'm going to plug that in because it's super easy to do, and then I just run some wires for both the fuel pressure sender and the flex sensor back up to the Haltech and plug that in. So that's what I'm going to do now. As long as those injectors get a constant pressurised supply of fuel behind them ready to squirt, the fuel system can be as fancy or agricultural as you like. Access on this truck is amazing because it's all under the tipper tray, no dropping tanks and no removing interiors. A total joy to work on. The hardware side of the fuel system is now done. I'm back onto wiring, which is the last thing I've got to do before this thing's ready to start and even take for a test drive. So at the moment I'm wiring in things like fuel pressure sensors, which allows us to set the base pressure and then any adjustment that needs to happen for boost. I've also got an oil pressure sensor, which I'm going to screw into that as well. And I've got the flex fuel sensor, which all use slightly different configurations. There's also the variable valve timing solenoid as well, which is a 12 volt system. The flex system is a 12 volt system, but the sensors are 5 volts. So there's provisions for all this in the loom, and it looks like spaghetti, but you just sort of pick through the instructions and it all is fairly clear. This is kind of actually the fun bit compared to trying to trigger it and make it work in the first place. So I'm going to connect a bunch of these wires, go back online with the laptop, tell it where all its sensors are, and then we should be ready to actually take it for a drive. Modern engines are covered in sensors to help the ECU manage and protect it. I can reuse some of the Daihatsu ones, but I'll also add my own in certain areas. Fuel pressure, ethanol content, air temperature, oil temperature and pressure, to name a few. I've also got outputs like a boost control solenoid and some gauges to run. A perfect example of a feature of aftermarket ECUs like mine is the fuel pressure sensor setup. It allows me to adjust the base fuel pressure and then log it in real time while driving and tuning. You can also set up protections so if fuel pressure were to drop, a limp mode can be engaged. Speaking of tuning, a quick phone call to Scott allows him to log into the ECU to set up some engine protection and some self-learning, a feature that allows the ECU to constantly feed back data into tables that can then be applied to the tune if desired. The wiring is done, so I can tuck it out of the way, we can test it all, and then I can tape it all up. Let's do this.
All right, Martin. Here we go, mate. Oh, sounds amazing.
And it actually goes now. I know we drove it before, but it didn't really have mapping for boost. And now, look, it's not properly mapped, but now you can actually drive it.
Oh, it's making all the right noises.
It's really cool. So what we're doing is sort of tuning the fuel injection. We're not really worrying about timing because that's a bit tricky to do on the road. You need a dyno for that, which we will get to. But for now, we're just sort of tuning the fuel load, which the Haltech can do a bit of itself.
This is the target of what the targets that we're looking for, and this is the long-range kind of
Trims.
Fuel trim over here.
When I accelerate, it's still a bit doughy, but it actually wants to accelerate.
There's boost.
Whereas before it was sort of hesitating, and you could tell once it came on boost, even though it's making lots of noises,
the factory ECU just completely just has no idea what's going on.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, to tune it really, I mean, you don't,
So good.
you drive it sensibly, but you just drive it around and the map sort of fleshes itself out, gets close to the number Scott wants to see. It also logs, so as soon as we're above 40% throttle, the ECU is automatically logging and saving those logs, and so you can send them off to your tuner and they can have a look.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Well done, Martin. That was a lot of nerdery, and it
Heaps.
very much is a, you know, one person in the belly of the whale. Like, that's not a 5-person job
No.
sitting there. Like, you just got to be over that yourself and just get it
Totally.
done. But you did a good job, man.
Thanks, man. But yeah, drives. I'm so stoked. I mean, a big hill like this might still be challenging for it, but before, we probably wouldn't have got up it
Yes.
easily. Because you can see it's making boost, manifold pressure. 2 pounds of boost, there it goes.
Yeah.
But it's going. And as we tune that and get more timing, it'll come to life. Isn't it glorious?
Oh, it's so good.
Glorious is the best word I can use to describe the sounds this thing makes, man. So cool.
Well done, Martin. That was very nerdy,
Oh,
but
so
very,
nerdy.
very worthwhile. Good job.
Have you hung around for all the nerdiness? If you have, thank you. Because that's legitimately how long it takes when you're dealing with something like this, where there's just no info.
Yeah.
I just couldn't get info, man.
Unless you can get it from Japan, from the source.
Yeah, which is pretty cool because I did spend a lot of time just trying to, you know, Google and do the normal research that you do when you're trying to make stuff like this work, and just I was coming up with absolutely nothing. And it's the first time that's happened because of the age of the vehicle and because of the obscurity of the vehicle and stuff like that. And then yeah, Rob came to the party and just walked into a Daihatsu dealership and went, "Excuse me,
That's so
could you guys help us out?" And the guys went, "Sure can," and then went and had lunch.
How are you feeling now it's done, mate?
Really good. So it's obviously not completely tuned, but I mean, as you could see from driving it around where it's sort of, you know, slowly correcting its fuel maps, it's pretty awesome that it's now a usable vehicle again. Would I run it at full wide open throttle up a massive hill in 4th gear? Probably
I would.
not. Probably not until it's seen a dyno, which it will see. But before it sees a dyno, we've got a couple of special things.
Well, the engine's done now, Martin, and it's making the right noises.
Yeah.
But now it's time to, you know,
Make it look the
bring
part.
the Bellissimo.
Yeah, because I mean, I think it looks cool and industrial as it is, but you know, in the background, there's been some parts acquisitions and some Bellissimo special stuff.
Some JDM Bellissimo.
I've completely stolen his
Like,
word.
No, that's good. It's like sashimi pasta.
So next episode, we're gonna dive into some aesthetics on this mad little truck nugget. Thank you for watching. Thank you for hanging out for some nerdiness. I'm really glad it works.
Well
I'm
done,
so
Martin.
stoked.
You did a good job.
Thanks, man.
Because while you did that, I made a bowl. That's what I did.
Did you
made a bowl.
Did you purchase something?
No, I made a bowl.
Good.
Let me just say, Martin. Let me just say this, Martin. That
You're acting like you purchased something. I know this look. I've seen it. I could, as soon as we got in the K truck, and you look at this like little kind of
just
this little twitch of
let me just
I've
say
got
that
something.
you're not the only person who's got a direct line to Japan. That's all.
See,
That's
I
all I'm
knew
going
it.
to say.
You can't help yourself.
And I mean, this is a mad truck. But what do we have here that is a reasonable competitor for this? Nothing. Not yet, Martin. But it's coming.
Well, it chopped
It's
your jimmy
done.
pretty hard, didn't it?
It's done. It's coming.
Let's go get
If
some
you
curry.
want to support the show, you can grab a t-shirt. Now, I say we do it ourselves, and by that I mean us and our mates pack this stuff. Some people, they just go, oh, there's a company that does it all for us, and they drop ship the thing on the
Drop
thing.
ship?
They drop it, I don't know, in a box, and you can buy it. Have you seen the
hope
poo
not.
machine in Tasmania?
What?
The
Oh
poo
yeah,
machine?
I have. I
Yeah.
heard about it.
And apparently, the price of it's a guy who sells his own poo. The value of his poo is going up higher than Bitcoin and the stock market.
Whoa.
Yeah, he sells jars of his own.
Just
shit.
like K trucks.
Anyway, what were we talking about again?
Getting a curry.
Oh
Although
no,
now
we're
you're talking about
about
dropshipping.
but all of our t-shirts and stuff, like we send them from here, right here in Sydney, Australia, and we send them to you anywhere in the world, and it does help. We don't do a Patreon. I'm not going to get into that, but if you give us some money, you get a shirt. That's kind of how it works.
And
thank you. You want a curry?
I'm going to go spend my money and get a curry.
Yeah,
like
nice.
a full katsu
Oh,
JDM
Japanese
curry.
katsu.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, nice.
Let's do it.
Thanks, everybody.
So keen.
Thank you very much.
Always keen for a curry. I'm going to hang it on my little bag hook.
We could sell out. Remember, I had it in the freezer. What episode was that in? Have they seen that yet? In the freezer.